Hi, my name is Josh. You can find me on Twitter at FYFJosh, and today I am tiering the top running backs for the 2022 fantasy football season. Also, if you like what you see here, like the video and go ahead and hit that subscribe button for Front Yard Fantasy. We will continue to put out great fantasy football and dynasty content throughout the offseason. So I have 6 tiers that the top running backs will fall into. This is for a PPR league going into the 2022 NFL season. Just to give you a brief description of each tier, the first tier is the elites. These running backs have elite production almost every week. They have very safe floors and very high ceilings, and you feel confident that they provide you an advantage over other rosters and other running backs. Then we have the borderline elites. You are absolutely starting these running backs in your fantasy lineups every week, and they're absolutely difference makers at the running back position. However, they just don't quite make it into the elite tier, but they're almost there. They just need a couple more things to go their way. Then we have the great starts. These are guys that are going to be drafted very high, and they're going to be weekly starters regardless of matchup, but they certainly have some question marks that keep them from being considered elite. Then there are the running back twos. These are running backs that you'll be able to throw into your lineup every week, but they have some serious concerns, whether it's their quarterback situation, competition around them, or maybe just a disappointing season in 2021. If everything does go right, these guys can absolutely move up tiers because they're all very talented. Then we have the running back threes. These are running backs that still have more to show on the football field before they can actually move up tiers. Some of these players are not even the starting running back for their own team currently. I like having these guys on my fantasy teams, but I'm not so sure I feel comfortable starting them every week. Then we have the high upside free agents. These running backs will be free agents this upcoming offseason. And if they end up in the right situation, they could be excellent fantasy producers in 2022. All right, so let's just get started, and we are going to start with the elites here. So I ended up putting 3 running backs actually in this tier, and these are the only running backs that have over 20 PPR fantasy points per game during the 2021 season. And the first running back we're going to put in here, and it's definitely not going to surprise a lot of people, it is Jonathan Taylor, 21.9 fantasy points per game during the 2021 season. This guy is a stud. I think he's going to be the number 1 overall draft pick in pretty much every league going into next season. After Jonathan Taylor, we're going to put in a guy that was absolutely killing it before he got injured. 24.2 fantasy points per game. That's more than 3 fantasy points per game, more than Jonathan Taylor, or close to 3. Derrick Henry is a stud. I know the injury might concern some people. We're going to get to see him play probably throughout the playoffs a little bit here, so that will give us a little bit more information. But Derrick Henry has to be one of the top running backs, top players coming off the board in 2022. And there's one more guy I'm putting into the elite here, and it might surprise some people, but it's Austin Ekeler, 21.5 fantasy points per game. This is only 0.4 PPR points per game less than Jonathan Taylor. And a lot of people might say that Jonathan Taylor belongs in a tier by himself, but I disagree. Jonathan Taylor, Derrick Henry, Austin Ekeler. Now, Eckler's an awesome pass catcher, and he turned into the Chargers' goal line running back this season. I do expect a little bit of touchdown regression. He scored 12 rushing TDs and 8 reception TDs. I don't expect him to score 20 total touchdowns again, but this guy's a stud. He belongs in the elite tier, in my opinion. So that's going to wrap up the elites, and we're going to move on to the borderline elites. And the first person we're going to put into the borderline elite category is Christian McCaffrey, CMC, 18.2 fantasy points per game. But everyone knows that he has some injury concerns here. He was the consensus number 1 pick the last 2 fantasy seasons, and he has disappointed fantasy managers that have drafted him. If you told me CMC would play 100% of every game next season, he would certainly be in the elite tier and possibly even be my running back 1. Are injuries and workload catching up to him? We shall see. The next running back I am going to put in here is Dalvin Cook. Now, Dalvin Cook had 15.9 fantasy points per game, and that's actually the lowest points per game that out of all the running backs, we're going to put it in the borderline elite category. He certainly is an incredible talent, but I'm a bit concerned about his workload throughout his career, but you got to put him right in this category, borderline elite tier. After Dalvin Cook, we are going to put in Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon looked really good, scoring 18 fantasy points per game over this season. This was the best fantasy season of his career. He played all 16 games in this high-powered offense that I expect to continue to grow. Joe Mixon's the stud. After Joe Mixon, we are going to put in Alvin Kamara. Alvin Kamara, 18.1 fantasy points per game. Great fantasy production when on the field, but there are things to be concerned about with this offense. And just about what we saw from Alvin Kamara. His yards per carry this year was 3.7 4 yards per carry. This is the lowest of his career, and his prior lowest was 4.55 yards per carry. This is not the Drew Brees-led Saints offense, but Alvin Kamara is still a stud. He still belongs in this category. After Alvin Kamara, we are going to put in Najee Harris. Najee Harris, the Steelers running back, 17.7 fantasy points per game, but there's not going to be any Big Ben going into next season. It looks like Big Ben is going to end up retiring, and it's probably about time. But Najee Harris was a check down machine with Big Ben this year. 94 targets, 74 catches, the most receptions out of all running backs over the course of the season, and tied with Austin Ekeler for the most targets. I just don't think he's going to have these same numbers next season, but he's still so good. He belongs right here. And then we're going to put one more person in this borderline elite tier. And, maybe this surprises some people. Maybe it doesn't. I think he belongs here. DeAndre Swift, 16.1 fantasy points per game. This was a breakout season of sorts for him just because he had a good rookie season, but this was even better in his second year in the NFL. He's efficient, even in a bad offense, an excellent pass catcher. He missed 4 games and was still the 15th highest scoring running back this year. So that's going to wrap up the borderline elites, and we're going to move on to the great starts. And the first person we are going to put into the great start category is Javonte Williams. Only 12.1 fantasy points per game, but this was his rookie year, splitting time with Melvin Gordon. Melvin Gordon is a free agent, and if this is Javonte Williams' backfield all to himself, he absolutely belongs here, and maybe even higher. But I still want to see it on the field first. After Javonte Williams, we are going to put in Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb just produces. I think he's at least an elite talent at the running back position. He's just not used as much. He has a little bit of a lack of pass catching upside. We know Kareem Hunt's going to be back. The Cleveland Browns like using him more in that pass catching role, but Nick Chubb's still great. After Nick Chubb, we are going to put in David Montgomery. 15 fantasy points per game. I do expect the Bears offense to improve going into next season, and David Montgomery's always underrated. He's probably going to be a great value. And the last person to wrap up this tier of great starts is going to be Antonio Gibson. 14.3 fantasy points per game, but he played with a fractured shin most of the season and still finished as the 12th highest scoring running back in his second season. He was also the 13th highest scoring running back his rookie year. Antonio Gibson is just really good at football, and he belongs in this year. Now we're going to move on to the running back twos, and the first running back we're going to put in here is Aaron Jones. The Packers gave him that big contract. Now what concerns me is, what does this offense look like next year? Is Aaron Rodgers going to be there? Is Davante Adams going to be there? A.J. Dillon looked really good, and is he going to eat it more into Aaron Jones' workload? I think Aaron Jones has carved out a role all to himself there with the Packers, but like I said, A.J. Dillon's going to be heavily involved as well. I'm putting him in the running back twos. After Aaron Jones, someone else we have similar concerns with is Ezekiel Elliott. 14.8 fantasy points per game. Tony Pollard takes away work. Elliott's efficiency and workload are decreasing year by year. Less carries, less receptions than the previous year. Still really like him in this Cowboys offense, but we got to be concerned at this point. After Ezekiel Elliott, we are going to put in someone who had an incredibly disappointing season, but I still really like Saquon Barkley as a talent. Look, this offense has got to get better. It can't get any worse. It's so bad this season, but I do expect him to come back strong. He has an elite work ethic. So Saquon Barkley, he's still a great pass catcher. He's going to be involved. After Saquon Barkley, we are going to put in Cam Akers. He didn't really play this season. We saw him the final game of the year get a couple carries, a couple catches, but we saw him play in wild card weekend for the Rams, and he looked great. Cam Akers tore his Achilles coming into the season, but I was really impressed with what I saw. This gives me a lot of confidence for him going into next season. After Cam Akers, someone very closely related to Cam Akers in my mind is J.K. Dobbins, because they both missed the season. J.K. Dobbins didn't play due to a torn ACL, but if you watch any Ravens games this year, you could tell the Ravens needed J.K. Dobbins on the field. He's an electric athlete. They didn't have anyone that could replicate what J.K. Dobbins is able to do in this offense. J.K. Dobbins should have a great year next year. After J.K. Dobbins, we are going to put in Josh Jacobs, who was impressive as well himself this season, 15.1 fantasy points per game, a top 12 running back the last 2 seasons, a growing role in the passing game. Let's see what happens when Kenyon Drake comes back next year, but I really like Josh Jacobs' talent. After Josh Jacobs, we are going to put in a rookie running back, Elijah Mitchell here, who continues to impress all of us. 15 fantasy points per game, an awesome rookie year. Kyle Shanahan and the 49ers seem to fully trust him as the lead back when he's healthy, and why wouldn't I expect that going into next season? That is going to wrap up the running back 2 category, and we're going to move on to the running back 3s. And the first person in the running back 3 category is going to be CEH, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, 11.8 fantasy points per game. Another disappointing season in this very high-powered Chiefs offense. I mean, hell, Darrell Williams looked better than him at times, especially when he was the starter. But this team does still seem committed to Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Going into next season, he's going to be the starting running back. He is talented, but he really hasn't put it all together, and I really hope we can see some of that next season. After Clyde Edwards-Helaire, we are going to throw Miles Sanders. Only 9.8 fantasy points per game. This is really bad considering the expectations we had for him coming into the season. Now, the Eagles did change their philosophy in the middle of the year. They were not running as much to start off the year, and then Miles Sanders got hurt, and then they kind of changed their philosophy. They went to more of a run-oriented team, and then when Miles Sanders came back and was healthy, he actually looked pretty good. So there is something to look forward to for Miles Sanders here, but we still have to see it. It's going to find him right here in this category. After Miles Sanders, we are going to put Travis Etienne, the rookie. He did not play last year due to his injury, but James Robinson tore his Achilles also with the Jacksonville Jaguars. So I do expect Travis Etienne to be the lead running back for this team going into next season. And he's so uber athletic. I loved this guy coming out of college. He's just got to put it together on this bad Jaguars team. After Travis Etienne, we're going to put Damian Harris, and Damian Harris impressed the hell out of me this season, scoring 14 fantasy points per game. He really took a giant step this season. However, he still has Ramondre Stevenson, a rookie that looked really good himself. And we know what the Patriots like to do. They like to mix in a bunch of different running backs. Damian Harris doesn't have a lot of pass catching upside. So does Ramondre Stevenson eat into this role a little bit next season? I absolutely could see that happening. After Damian Harris, we are going to throw in Michael Carter, the Jets rookie running back from this season, 11 fantasy points per game. He's a rookie who can catch the ball. He's on a bad offense, sure, but this team seems to have grown some confidence in him. I could see Carter being an excellent pass-catching running back for years to come with even more rushing upside. So I really like Michael Carter. After Michael Carter, we're going to put in Kareem Hunt. Maybe you forgot about him. I know I didn't. 13.8 fantasy points per game. This man just finds a way to score fantasy points. He's a great pass catcher, and the Browns want to run the ball a lot. Kareem Hunt belongs here. After Kareem Hunt, we're going to put in Devin Singletary. Oh, man. So 11.6 fantasy points per game. Most of the season, Singletary was in a committee with Zach Moss and Matt Breida. Josh Allen is also a goal line running back of sorts that you have to be concerned about. But starting in week 14, Singletary was on the field for around 80% of the team snaps on average, and he averaged almost 20 PPR fantasy points per game. That is very promising. I like Devin Singletary going into next season. And then to wrap up this tier, we have 3, I'll call them backup running backs, but they're extremely high-end backup running backs that have production on their own. And if something happened to the running back in front of them, they'd also be extremely valuable. They would absolutely move up tiers. So the first running back I mentioned, I'll just put them all in here. It's A.J. Dillon, Tony Pollard, and Ramondre Stevenson. And for all the same reason, again, I do project them to be the backup, but they are high-end backups. I would absolutely draft A.J. Dillon, Tony Pollard, then Ramondre Stevenson in this order, but I do think they belong in the same tier more or less. A.J. Dillon, absolutely the highest out of these 3, however. So moving on to the final tier, we have the high upside free agents. These are all guys that are going to be free agents going into the 2022 fantasy season, but they'll have a lot of upside. There are more free agent running backs, but these are the ones that I could realistically see falling into these tiers if everything went the right way. The first person we're going to mention out of these high upside free agents is Leonard Fournette. He was with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this year. He's a free agent, like I said, but 18.3 fantasy points per game. Fournette apparently turned down more money coming into the season to sign a 1-year contract to stay with the Bucs. I am sure Fournette will have more interest this offseason because of how good this season was, but why wouldn't the Bucs want to keep this guy after how impressive he looks? If Fournette stays with the Bucs, he would fall into the back end of the borderline elite tier for me. So he makes a huge jump in tiers as long as he's with the Bucs next season. But even if he's with a starting running back for another team, I really like Leonard Fournette. After Leonard Fournette, we're going to throw in James Conner, 17.2 fantasy points per game. Much like Fournette, Conner surprised a lot of people this season. I feel like the best situation for Conner and the Cardinals is if the Cardinals just end up re-signing him. He looked really good with the Cardinals. If Conner is with the Cardinals, he would fall into the every week starter category for me, or the great start category for me. So he would absolutely be up there in the tiers. After James Conner, we're going to put in his teammate, Chase Edmonds, 11.9 fantasy points per game, another Cardinals running back that's a free agent, like I said. I love his skill set, but I don't think he will ever be a workhorse running back like Conner and Fournette can be. He's a great pass catcher, absolutely. He's very explosive. If you pair Edmonds with a good quarterback, he probably ends up in, the tier with the running back threes, but with a lot more upside than a lot of those other guys. After Chase Edmonds, we were going to put in Melvin Gordon, 12.2 fantasy points per game. Now, Gordon is getting older. He spent this past season with the Denver Broncos, but looked really good. He produced very well, and he didn't let Javonte Williams steal that job from him. And that's because Melvin Gordon's really good himself. If a team signs him to be their lead back, he could have a very good season, but he'll probably end up in the running back threes. As long as he's a lead back, he's going to be in these tiers. After Melvin Gordon, we are going to put in Rashad Penny. Rashad Penny, 12.2 fantasy points per game. I really hope Penny stays with the Seahawks, to be honest. It's hard for me to buy in and feel confident in Penny because his production comes from such a small sample size. But he did look really good. As long as he can stay healthy, I am optimistic, but couldn't put him above the running back 3 category, regardless of situation. The next running back we're going to put here is Sony Michel, 8.6 fantasy points per game. Sony proved a ton with the Rams this season. Maybe ends up on a team like, I don't know, the Falcons, and they give him a ton of carries. If he's a backup, though, I will be avoiding Sony Michel. But, if he can get a starting role somewhere, I'm going to be very excited. After Sony Michel, we're going to put in Cordell Patterson, 14.7 fantasy points per game. And wow, maybe the most surprising season out of any player this year. Patterson came out of nowhere in his 9th NFL season, really playing more of a running back role, a hybrid wide receiver running back role. But this guy will be 31 years old next season. I think the best situation will be just to have him back in Atlanta because I don't trust any other team utilizing him correctly or how he was utilized this year. And then the last person, we're going to throw in Ronald Jones, only 5 fantasy points per game. I mentioned Ronald Jones here for one reason and one reason only. If Tampa Bay does not sign Leonard Fournette and they decide to bring Ronald Jones back as their lead running back, I will be very excited, especially if his only competition is someone like Keyshawn Vaughn. Ronald Jones, he's going to be a good fantasy producer if he's the lead running back for the Bucs and Tom Brady's there. Another little tidbit we have to mention. So this is going to wrap up the video. Please let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with anything. Have a great day.